Okay, so here goes. This is something I've been dying to share for a while now. It's a long story, so bear with me. And yeah, I know it sounds totally unbelievable, but trust me, I wish it were all just made up. My family got torn apart, and I'm basically forbidden from talking about it because my parents are all about sweeping it under the rug. So I'm using my friend's brother's Reddit to stay low key. To give you some background, my parents both had some rough luck in the relationship department. My dad split from my older sister Lucy's mom. Lucy's 25 now, and my mom lost her ex-husband in a car accident, leaving her to take care of my brother. He's 23 now. Anyway, they met at a beach, exchanged numbers, started dating, and 2 years later, tied the knot. Now, let's get to the real story. It kicked off when I was 8 and my siblings were 17 and 19. My brother Kirby was in his third year of high school, and my sister Lucy was working at a nearby grocery store. With my parents and Lucy often busy, Kirby and I spent a lot of time together. I know it sounds odd, but those were the best times of my life. We had this amazing bond, you know? He looked after me, played with me, even helped me with schoolwork, and sometimes he'd take the blame if I messed up. One day, though, things went south. I was waiting for Kirby to pick me up after school, as usual, but he never showed. My sister eventually came to get me, and when I asked about Kirby, she just dodged the question. When we got home, it was chaos. The place was a wreck, and I could hear my parents screaming. Inside, my dad was kicking Kirby and throwing dishes at him, while my mom hurled curses. It was terrifying. Lucy took me upstairs and told me to stay put. I just sat there listening and crying until I heard sirens. From my window, I saw cops arriving and busting into our house. A little later, they dragged my parents out, who were screaming all sorts of horrible things at Kirby. When I went downstairs, I saw Lucy holding Kirby, who was covered in blood and bruises. Everything after that is a blur, but I remember being in an ambulance and then at a hospital. Lucy says it was the worst day of her life, and I believe her. My parents got jailed for assault and attempted murder, so Lucy took time off work to look after me. I eventually worked up the courage to ask her what happened. She treated me like an adult and told me the truth. Kirby was accused of rape by a girl at his school. This girl, Karen, if you're reading this, Karen, screw you for ruining our lives, claimed Kirby abused her. Despite Kirby's denials, my parents believed her over him. The police started an investigation, and Kirby was sent home, leading to my parents' violent outburst. Kirby ended up in the hospital with serious injuries. The next day, Lucy took me to the police station, and what we found out was beyond belief. Turns out, Karen made the whole thing up because she and Kirby hated each other. She hurt herself and claimed Kirby did it, escalating her lie to rape just to get him expelled. But she screwed up by bragging about it to her friends during a video call. One of her friends, who had actually been abused and not believed, went to the police with a recording of Karen's confession. Karen's parents ended up having to pay a fine for her false accusation and slander. When Lucy confronted our parents with the truth, they were in shock. Even then, my dad had the nerve to ask if Lucy was sure about all this. Lucy let them have it, calling them out for believing Karen without any proof. My father tried to justify himself, but Lucy wasn't having it. It was a mess. Kirby eventually woke up but was in terrible shape. He had a broken jaw, lost 60% vision in one eye, broken arm and ribs, and leg injuries so bad he'd never walk properly again. He developed PTSD, depression, and anxiety. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was only to answer questions. He'd often cry out of nowhere, probably due to the trauma. His physical injuries were so severe that even hugging him was risky. So yeah, that's my story. It completely shattered my family, and I'll never forgive my parents for what they did to Kirby. Many times my parents tried to visit my brother. My mom was practically begging, and my dad even wanted to force us to take them. But my sister wouldn't let them go because she knew our brother didn't want to see them. She told them this, but it wasn't enough. One day my mom couldn't visit him because of work, and my parents saw this as the perfect chance to sneak over to see my brother. I guess they thought it would go something like, "Let's visit our son, apologize, he'll accept, and we'll all be one big happy family again." Haha, what a serious mistake that was. As soon as they walked into the room, my brother let out the loudest scream I've ever heard from him. Doctors and nurses rushed in to calm him down. He was yelling, "Get them out of here! They are murderers! They have come to kill me! Please get them out of here!" He then started crying and soon passed out from the stress. Of course, my parents were expelled from the hospital and banned from seeing Kirby. Only my sister and I were allowed to see him after that. My mom cried all night while my dad kept blaming our brother, saying he was exaggerating. After many months of physical and mental recovery, Kirby was finally released from the hospital. My parents, unbelievably, asked him to come home, but he responded, "I would not come back to this house even if it were the last place on earth. From now on, I am also motherless. I hope you both pay for everything you did to me." Kirby moved in with our paternal grandparents, who didn't know anything about the situation until then. They took protective measures against our parents and said my sister and I were welcome to visit him whenever we wanted. And we did. Honestly, I spent more time with Kirby than at home with our parents. But the final straw came at a family party when we found out that my dad had lied to the whole family. He said Kirby had dropped out of school, got into drugs, and ran away with the money saved for my college. That money wasn't even earned by my parents. It was Kirby and Lucy who were saving up for me. Kirby took on various odd jobs, and now he's working hard because, according to him, I deserve a better future. My sister and I were furious. We told the whole truth to our family, who were incredulous and very angry with our parents. The only ones who stood by our parents were our paternal grandparents, who said our parents did nothing wrong and were just ashamed of what they did. No one else listened, and they all went to apologize to Kirby. Funny enough, Kirby called me the next day, confused as to why people he hadn't spoken to in months were apologizing to him. A year after the incident, Karen's parents showed up at our door asking if Kirby was home. When we said no, they apologized for what happened and left. Later, I found out they wanted to pay Kirby back by giving him all the money meant for Karen. My brother simply said thanks, but made it clear he'll never forgive Karen, and that if she ever shows up, he'll tell her some harsh truths. Currently, my big brother is much better, but still has nightmares and anxiety attacks about that day. Someone needs to be there to calm him down. I want to help my brother and escape the toxic environment at home, so I thought about moving in with Kirby. I spoke to him first. He was hesitant but eventually agreed. His grandparents were okay with it too. Lucy thought it was a great idea, but when I told my parents, it was a different story. My mom burst into tears and my dad was desperate, saying everyone had already abandoned them, and now I was too. I got irritated and told him I had already abandoned him that awful afternoon, and he'd never have me back. My dad, always saying crying was for sissies, started crying like a baby, saying he'd lost everything and didn't want to lose me too. I couldn't stand the situation, so I left and went to a friend's house to vent. My friend scolded me, saying I shouldn't abandon my parents like that. His older brother, Steve, who owns this Reddit account, told him to shut up and said I should seek more opinions. He introduced me to Reddit and asked me to ask this question. What do I do, guys? Asterisk, asterisk. Update 1. Well, guys, a lot has happened since I last posted. Thanks to your supportive comments, I made up my mind. I ended up having to run away from home because my parents forbade me to leave. I waited for them to leave the house together to go shopping. They never took me along because they thought I'd just asked for junk. So I packed a backpack with some basics and snacks to cover it up. Once we got to the market, I asked to go to the bathroom. They were so obsessed with food prices that my dad just told me to go and come back soon. Plot twist, I didn't go back. I ran away from the market and took the bus closest to Kirby's grandparents' house. When I got there, Kirby's grandmother welcomed me and told me to relax while waiting for Kirby and his grandpa. When they arrived, I told them everything that had happened. My brother was initially upset, saying it was irresponsible to run away because something could have happened to me. I actually like it when he scolds me. It shows he cares, unlike our parents who wouldn't miss me for days. I accepted the scolding and asked if I could stay. He said, "You'll come back here even if I send you back, so you better stay." I was thrilled and hugged him. His grandparents were also happy with his decision, but my joy faded when he said I had to notify my parents. I protested, knowing they'd come for me, but my brother insisted. If I didn't tell them, they could call the police and claim he kidnapped me. I called my mom, and she started screaming as soon as she answered. When I told her where I was, she got even angrier, yelling in a way everyone around me could hear. I could have stayed on the call, but I hung up when I saw Kirby was uncomfortable. He's sensitive to yelling now. He cursed our parents for what they did to him. I got angry and said they could come and take me by force, but my brother said So these guys were total jerks but not complete idiots. They knew my brother had some protective measures in place, and if they tried to mess with us, we'd call the cops. But man, were they wrong. About an hour and a half later, they showed up banging on our front door, cursing and losing it. Kirby's grandparents shouted at them to leave or they'd call the police, which only pissed them off more. They kept banging on the door like crazy. I wanted to march out there and tell them to scram, but Kirby needed me. I had to hold him back because he was ready to go out there and give them a piece of his mind. He's got a lot of pent-up anger about these idiots. He once said he wanted to kill them slowly and painfully. Honestly, I can get why he feels that way, but I don't think he should dirty his hands with their nonsense. Then things really went south. They broke down the door and started tearing the house apart, looking for me. That was it. I decided to go downstairs and deal with them. But first, I had to calm Kirby down, so he'd stay safe. Right then, my mom let out the loudest scream I've ever heard, and my dad just went silent. After convincing Kirby to stay put, I rushed downstairs. The scene was a nightmare. My dad was on the floor, shaking, while my mom was sobbing over him, calling out to him with no response. Kirby's grandpa was clutching a taser, so it was pretty clear what had gone down. When my mom saw me, she freaked out, yelling at me to call the cops because of what they did to Dad. I told her if we called the cops, she'd be the one getting arrested for ignoring the protective order. She kept on screaming for us to get an ambulance for Dad, but we ignored her. We agreed that once Dad was okay, they needed to leave and never come back. As Dad started to come around, he was eerily quiet, clearly beat and broken. Out of nowhere, Kirby came downstairs, and Mom went ballistic on him. She started blaming him for everything, saying he was the reason all the relatives had abandoned her and that her kids were turning their backs on her. She played the victim card hard, claiming she was just an innocent churchgoer who didn't deserve any of this. Honestly, it made no sense. Kirby stayed quiet through her entire meltdown, but then she crossed the line. She demanded he apologize to them for destroying their lives and tell the family he forgave them. That did it. Kirby slapped her so hard she fell down. Mom started screaming again, but Kirby told her to shut up or he'd knock her teeth out with a cane. He let loose all the anger he'd kept inside for years, calling them miserable people who dug their own graves and didn't deserve anyone's care. He even said when they die, he'd make a point to piss on their coffins. Mom got even more furious and tried to hit Kirby, but I pushed her against the wall. She then turned on me, calling me a disgusting gay who would go to hell. For context, I'm bisexual, and telling my parents was a mistake. Surprisingly, Dad was cool with it, but Mom lost it. She even tried to set me up with her friends' daughters from church. Gross and super uncomfortable for everyone involved. The funny part was when I told Kirby, he just said, "So, you give me a nephew, let's be cool." Anyway, Kirby started to kick them out, demanding they pay for the damage or we'd report them. Mom laughed, saying I wouldn't dare report my own mother. I told her I had all the courage in the world and would love to see her arrested again. She tried to make excuses, but Kirby shut her down, saying we had fingerprints, camera footage, and video evidence. Eventually, she gave in and they left. But Kirby wanted to have the last word. As she got into the car, he yelled, "I wish you could die in Dad's place." She flipped him off and drove away, still screaming.